March 15, 1991, 7:43 p.m., the Rainbow Room, New York City. 32-year-old Prince Rogers Nelson was attending a charity auction for music education when 58-year-old Wall Street titan Marcus Steinberg, worth an estimated $2.3 billion from decades of ruthless corporate takeovers, looked at Prince with obvious contempt and announced to the entire room of Manhattan's financial elite, "It's amusing how these little pop stars think they understand money. This boy probably makes more in a year than most people see in a lifetime, but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in real business, where actual intelligence is required." What Steinberg didn't realize was that he had just insulted someone who had been secretly building a financial empire that operated on levels of strategic thinking that made Wall Street look like a children's game. Prince's response wasn't anger or argument. It was a systematic 72-hour campaign of economic warfare that would cost Steinberg $500 million, destroy his reputation among the financial elite he had dominated for 30 years, and prove that some forms of genius operate in dimensions that traditional businessmen cannot even perceive, let alone compete against. If you believe that true intelligence reveals itself not through boasting but through results that speak louder than any words, please subscribe to witness the moment when Wall Street's most arrogant billionaire discovered that underestimating an artist's business acumen was the most expensive mistake of his career. Marcus Steinberg had built his fortune through what he called predatory capitalism, identifying vulnerable companies, acquiring them through hostile takeovers, stripping their assets, and selling the pieces for maximum profit. By 1991, Steinberg Capital Management controlled interests in 17 major corporations, employed over 40,000 people across 12 countries, and had earned Steinberg a reputation as one of Wall Street's most feared and respected deal-makers. Steinberg's presence at the charity auction wasn't motivated by philanthropy, but by networking opportunities with other wealthy individuals who might prove useful for future business ventures. His $50,000 donation to music education was a tax-deductible investment in maintaining his social standing among New York's elite, not a genuine commitment to supporting arts programs. Prince's attendance at the same event reflected a different relationship with wealth and influence. Since achieving mainstream success with Purple Rain in 1984, Prince had been quietly building a business empire that few people understood or recognized. While most musicians focused solely on their artistic careers, Prince had been studying finance, corporate law, and investment strategies, with the same intensity he applied to music composition. What the music industry didn't know was that Prince had been operating under the guidance of Eleanor Chen, a former Goldman Sachs executive who had left Wall Street in 1987 to manage investments for artists who wanted to transcend traditional entertainment industry limitations. Eleanor had recognized Prince's unusual combination of creative genius and analytical intelligence, understanding that his approach to music composition, layering complex elements into unified artistic statements, translated perfectly to financial strategy. Under Eleanor's mentorship, Prince had developed an understanding of market dynamics, corporate structure, and financial manipulation that equaled or exceeded that of many professional investors. He had spent countless hours studying quarterly reports, analyzing market trends, and learning to identify opportunities that traditional Wall Street analysts were missing because they didn't understand cultural shifts happening in entertainment and technology. By 1991, Prince's business portfolio was a masterpiece of diversification and strategic thinking. His real estate investments included properties in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, New York, and London, carefully selected not just for their current value, but for their potential to appreciate as cultural and technological changes transformed their neighborhoods. His $75 million in real estate holdings were generating over $8 million annually in rental income while appreciating at rates that exceeded stock market returns. More significantly, Prince had been one of the first major investors to recognize the potential of digital music technology. While most of the music industry was still focused on CD sales and traditional radio promotion, Prince had quietly acquired ownership stakes in 3 technology companies that were developing what would eventually become streaming music platforms. These investments, worth approximately $15 million when he made them in 1989, would eventually be worth over $200 million as digital music transformed the entire entertainment industry. Prince's most sophisticated financial moves were completely invisible to the music press and entertainment industry observers, who assumed his wealth came primarily from album sales and concert revenues. Through a complex network of international holding companies incorporated in strategic tax jurisdictions, Prince had created a business structure that maximized investment returns while minimizing tax obligations in ways that were completely legal but extraordinarily sophisticated. The holding company structure also allowed Prince to invest in controversial or politically sensitive industries without public knowledge. He owned stakes in several defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and energy corporations, investments that generated substantial returns but would have created public relations problems if they had been directly associated with his artistic persona. The confrontation at the Rainbow Room began when Prince was introduced to Steinberg during the cocktail reception that preceded the auction. The introduction was arranged by the event's organizer, who thought both men might be interested in discussing potential collaborations between entertainment and finance. Steinberg's initial response to meeting Prince was polite but dismissive. He saw Prince as a talented entertainer who had achieved commercial success but lacked the intellectual sophistication required to understand serious business operations. "So you're the Purple Rain fellow," Steinberg said, his tone carrying the condescending friendliness that successful people often use when addressing those they consider inferior. "Quite impressive what you've accomplished in the music business. Must be nice to make millions just by singing songs." Prince listened without immediate response, recognizing the underlying assumption that musical success required less intelligence than financial success. "Of course," Steinberg continued, emboldened by Prince's silence and the attention of nearby guests who had begun listening to their conversation. "The entertainment industry is quite different from real business. In finance, we deal with numbers that actually matter: corporate valuations, market capitalizations, economic indicators that affect millions of jobs and trillions of dollars." Prince nodded politely, still saying nothing but observing Steinberg carefully. "It's amusing how these little pop stars think they understand money," Steinberg announced to the room, his voice growing louder as he warmed to what he clearly considered an entertaining topic. "This boy probably makes more in a year than most people see in a lifetime, but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in real business where actual intelligence is required." The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from some guests and disapproving looks from others who recognized Steinberg's statement as unnecessarily cruel and publicly embarrassing. Prince looked at Steinberg for a long moment, then smiled with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing something your opponent doesn't. "Marcus," Prince said quietly, "you're right that entertainment and finance are different businesses. But you're wrong about which one requires more intelligence. Would you like me to show you the difference?" Steinberg laughed, assuming Prince was making some kind of artistic metaphor rather than proposing actual business competition. "By all means," Steinberg replied, gesturing theatrically to the room full of witnesses. "Enlighten us about the sophisticated financial strategies of pop music." "I'll do better than that," Prince said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to cost you $500 million in the next 72 hours. Using nothing but publicly available information and the kind of strategic thinking that you apparently don't believe exists outside of Wall Street." Before we reveal how Prince systematically destroyed one of Wall Street's most successful billionaires using financial weapons that Steinberg never saw coming, let me ask you, have you ever seen someone's arrogance blind them to dangers they should have recognized? Have you witnessed intelligence triumph over ignorance in ways that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because what happened next became a masterclass in why underestimating quiet people is always the most expensive mistake you can make. Prince left the charity auction immediately after making his threat to Steinberg, but he didn't go home to Minneapolis. Instead, he went directly to Eleanor Chen's Manhattan office, where they spent the next 8 hours analyzing every aspect of Steinberg Capital Management's business operations. What they discovered was that Steinberg's empire, while impressive on paper, was built on financial foundations that were more fragile than they appeared. His aggressive acquisition strategy had left him over-leveraged in several sectors, particularly in real estate and emerging technology markets that were showing signs of instability. More importantly, Eleanor's analysis revealed that Steinberg had made several investment decisions based on insider information that, while technically legal, had created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with sufficient resources and strategic thinking. Marcus Steinberg thinks financial warfare is about having more money than your opponent, Eleanor explained to Prince as they reviewed corporate documents throughout the night. But real economic power comes from understanding market psychology, information asymmetry, and timing. We don't need to outspend him, we need to outsmart him. Prince's first move came at 9 a.m. on March 16, just 14 hours after Steinberg's public humiliation. Through a carefully coordinated network of investment advisors operating out of offices in New York, London, and Hong Kong, Prince began placing strategic short positions against several stocks in Steinberg's portfolio. Not enough to move markets significantly, but enough to signal to algorithmic trading systems and institutional investors that someone with serious capital was expecting those companies to decline. The beauty of Prince's approach was its subtlety. Rather than making obvious aggressive moves that would trigger regulatory attention or market manipulation investigations, he used the kind of sophisticated trading strategies that were completely legal but required deep understanding of market psychology and electronic trading systems. Simultaneously, Prince activated relationships he had developed over 7 years of careful networking with technology executives in Silicon Valley, entertainment industry leaders in Los Angeles, media contacts in New York, and financial journalists in London. Through carefully orchestrated phone calls and private conversations, he began circulating meticulously researched information about potential problems with companies in Steinberg's portfolio. The information Prince shared was never false, misleading, or based on insider knowledge. Instead, it consisted of legitimate concerns about market conditions, pending regulatory changes, competitive pressures, and technological disruptions that Steinberg's analysts had either overlooked or underestimated in their pursuit of short-term profits. Eleanor had taught Prince that the most effective financial warfare doesn't require lying or cheating. It requires understanding information flow better than your opponents do. Marcus Steinberg's weakness isn't that he's stupid, Eleanor explained as they coordinated their assault. His weakness is that he's arrogant enough to believe that his traditional Wall Street sources give him complete information about industries he doesn't really understand. By aggregating scattered concerns from multiple industries and amplifying them through influential voices across entertainment, technology, and finance, Prince created market sentiment that began affecting stock prices within hours. The key was timing, ensuring that negative information about Steinberg's holdings reached decision-makers simultaneously across multiple markets, creating selling pressure that appeared organic rather than coordinated. Steinberg's first indication that something was systematically wrong came when his chief financial officer Robert Martinez called at 11:30 a.m. to report unusual trading patterns in 3 of their major holdings. Stock prices were declining without any obvious catalysts, but the selling pressure was consistent across multiple exchanges and appeared to be driven by institutional investors rather than retail panic. By noon, Steinberg Capital Management had lost $47 million in paper value, and financial news outlets were beginning to report on the mysterious selling pressure affecting, quote, several companies in the Steinberg portfolio. But Prince was just getting started. His second phase of attack targeted Steinberg's reputation within the exclusive network of ultra-wealthy investors who controlled access to the most profitable deals. Through Eleanor's connections at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and other major investment banks, Prince began sharing information about Steinberg's business practices that, while not illegal, painted a picture of an investor whose success had made him reckless and overconfident. The information Prince shared included details about Steinberg's over-leveraged positions, his tendency to ignore risk management protocols, and his habit of making investment decisions based on ego rather than analytical data, all information that was available to anyone who knew how to research corporate filings and market data properly. By the end of the first day, Steinberg had lost $127 million in portfolio value and had received calls from 3 major pension funds expressing concerns about their investments in Steinberg Capital Management. But Prince's most devastating attack was yet to come. On March 17th, Prince executed what Eleanor would later describe as the most sophisticated, coordinated financial assault I've ever witnessed outside of government economic warfare. Using his extensive network of contacts in entertainment, technology, and media industries, Prince orchestrated a series of events that created a cascade of negative publicity and market pressure that Steinberg couldn't counter or defend against. First, Prince arranged for several major entertainment companies to announce new streaming music initiatives that would compete directly with traditional media companies in Steinberg's portfolio. These announcements weren't fake. They were legitimate business developments that Prince had helped accelerate through his industry connections. Second, Prince's technology investments gave him advanced knowledge of regulatory changes that would affect telecommunications companies that Steinberg had heavily invested in. By sharing this information with financial journalists and industry analysts, Prince ensured that market awareness of these changes happened faster than Steinberg's team could respond. Third, and most devastatingly, Prince used his celebrity status to influence consumer behavior in ways that directly affected companies in Steinberg's portfolio. Through carefully orchestrated social media campaigns and public statements, Prince encouraged his millions of fans to boycott products and services from companies that Steinberg controlled, creating immediate revenue impacts that showed up in quarterly earnings reports. By the end of March 17, Steinberg Capital Management had lost $312 million in value, and Marcus Steinberg was facing margin calls on several leveraged positions that threatened to force him to sell assets at significant losses. The third and final day of Prince's assault was both the most subtle and most effective. Instead of continuing direct attacks on Steinberg's holdings, Prince focused on destroying Steinberg's reputation among the small circle of elite investors who controlled access to the most exclusive and profitable deals. Eleanor arranged for Prince to attend 3 private investment meetings on March 18, where he demonstrated knowledge of market dynamics, corporate strategy, and financial analysis that shocked veteran Wall Street professionals. By showing that he understood their business better than many of them did, Prince established credibility that made his subtle criticisms of Steinberg's methods impossible to dismiss. "I've worked with a lot of successful people," Prince told a gathering of hedge fund managers at a private club in Manhattan. "The ones who last are the ones who remember that intelligence and arrogance are 2 completely different things. The ones who fail are usually the ones who mistake past success for future guarantees." The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Marcus Steinberg represented the kind of overconfident, past-their-prime investor that smart money should avoid. By 6 p.m. on March 18, exactly 72 hours after Prince's initial threat, Marcus Steinberg had lost $508 million in portfolio value, had been dropped by 2 major institutional investors, and had received calls from financial journalists asking for comment about concerns within the investment community about Steinberg Capital Management's risk management practices. But Prince's most elegant finishing move was yet to come. At 7:43 p.m., exactly 72 hours after Steinberg's initial insult, Prince called Steinberg directly from Eleanor's Manhattan office to inform him that the systematic assault was over. The call was brief but devastating in its precision. "Marcus," Prince said when Steinberg answered, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had just accomplished exactly what he had promised. "You mentioned that I wouldn't last 5 minutes in real business. I thought you should know that it took me exactly 72 hours to cost you $500 million, using nothing but the kind of strategic thinking that you apparently don't believe exists outside of Wall Street." Steinberg, who had spent 3 days watching his carefully constructed empire crumble without understanding how or why it was happening, could barely form coherent sentences. The man who had built his reputation on decisive communication and strategic thinking was reduced to stammering confusion. "How did you? What did you? This is impossible." "I did exactly what I told you I would do," Prince replied with the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a confused child. "I used publicly available information, strategic thinking, and coordinated action to demonstrate the difference between someone who understands money and someone who just happens to have accumulated money." Prince paused, allowing Steinberg time to process the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds, while Steinberg struggled to comprehend that a little pop star had just outmaneuvered him using financial weapons he hadn't even known existed. "The systematic attacks stop now, Marcus," Prince continued. "Your portfolio will stabilize over the next week, your reputation will begin recovering within a month, and your business will continue operating. But you'll remember for the rest of your life that underestimating quiet people based on their public profession is always the most expensive mistake you can make." Before ending the call, Prince delivered the final lesson that would haunt Steinberg for decades. Real intelligence isn't about what industry you work in or how much money you control. It's about understanding systems that other people don't see, and having the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to demonstrate that understanding. You spent 30 years learning how to take companies apart. I spent 7 years learning how to take apart the people who think they can't be touched. Marcus Steinberg never fully recovered from Prince's 72-hour assault. While he managed to rebuild some of his losses over the following years, his reputation among elite investors was permanently damaged. More importantly, the financial community learned that Prince Rogers Nelson operated on levels of business sophistication that few entertainers had ever achieved. When Prince died in 2016, his business empire was worth an estimated $800 million, most of which came from investments and strategic acquisitions that had nothing to do with music sales. Eleanor Chen, who had managed Prince's investments for over 25 years, revealed that Prince had been one of the most sophisticated investors she had ever worked with. "Prince understood something that most business people never learn," Eleanor said at Prince's memorial service. "True wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about how well you understand the systems that create and destroy wealth." Marcus Steinberg had more money than Prince, but Prince understood money in ways that Steinberg never could. Today, the Steinberg Incident is studied in business schools as an example of how market psychology, strategic thinking, and coordinated information campaigns can be more powerful than raw financial resources. It's also cited as a case study in why successful people should never underestimate opponents based on their primary profession or public persona. The Rainbow Room, where the confrontation began, now hosts an annual charity auction for music education that has raised over $50 million since 1991. A small plaque near the entrance reads, "March 15, 1991. The night intelligence proved more valuable than arrogance." Prince Rogers Nelson demonstrated that true financial genius operates through understanding rather than intimidation, and that the most dangerous opponents are often those who remain quiet while their enemies reveal their vulnerabilities through overconfidence. A pop star taught Wall Street's elite that some forms of intelligence transcend professional categories, and that underestimating quiet people is always the most expensive mistake you can make in any business. If this story reminds you that real power comes from understanding systems rather than simply having resources, and that true intelligence reveals itself through results rather than boasting, please subscribe to keep these lessons alive. Because the world needs more examples of how strategic thinking defeats arrogance, and how quiet competence always triumphs over loud ignorance in the end.